What are the most important muscles to get faster? Today we're going to be looking at a range of muscles and ranking them to determine which are the most crucial for sprinting fast. And at the end of the video, I'll reveal the powerhouse muscle that I consider the ultimate game changer for speed. First up, we have the tibialis anterior, which is responsible for dorsiflexion of the foot. And while this does play some role in sprinting, and while training this muscle has some other benefits, it won't directly make you a faster athlete. The tibialis anterior goes in the F tier. Next up, we have the quads, and these are of course somewhat important for sprinting. However, I think a lot of casual viewers would overestimate their impact. They are most important during the start/acceleration phase of sprinting. However, they also act to help stabilize the leg and prevent collapsing of the knee at ground contact during max velocity sprinting. I'm going to put the quads in the B tier. Next are the hip flexors. Hip flexors are responsible for lifting up the leg, and there is some research showing that training your hip flexors can result in sprint improvements in untrained athletes. And while I do think hip flexors can improve specifically your acceleration abilities, which by the way you can get better at by downloading the free 4-week training program, link in the description. There are a lot of people on social media and stuff using this comparison between Powell and Asahara as definitive proof of their importance. Like this isn't just a single example and like they both aren't already elite sprinters. I'm going to put the hip flexors in the B tier above the quads. Next we have the chest. Now I think this is a bit of a hot take, but I think that the chest is an absolute garbanzo muscle for sprinting. Again, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do things like bench press, etc. for other reasons, but during the actual sprint itself, I cannot see what role, if any, chest plays. A YouTuber I really like, Aesop Merrick, did a video semi-related to this that I recommend you check out. I'm gonna put the chest in the F tier below the tibialis anterior. Now we have the glute medius. This muscle serves to stabilize the pelvis during unilateral movements such as Bulgarian split squats or of course sprinting. Like the quads, it also helps to stabilize the knee during ground contact and hence has a somewhat important role in sprinting. I'm a big fan of this muscle for athletic performance in general. However, if we're talking specifically about sprinting, I can't put it super high. I'm gonna put the glute medius in the C tier. Next up we have the core. During a sprint, the core acts as a stabilizer for the upper body, reducing unwanted twisting or rotational movement that occurs with each stride. This prevents what are sometimes called energy leaks, ensuring that the energy produced is directed to efficiently move you forward. Basically, your core functions to keep your upper body from wavering excessively, which helps maintain a straight and efficient sprinting form. For example, Usain Bolt was well known to like his core exercises.
Always core.
Cool.
And yeah, abs and back exercise.
I wrote a short article about this if you're interested, link in the description. I'm gonna put the core muscles in the A tier. Next up we have the calf muscles, the gastroc and the soleus. The lower leg is important in sprinting because you can generate heaps of power from your hips, etc. But if your lower leg is like a wet rag, you're never going to be able to transmit that force into the ground efficiently. Or as elite sprint coach Randy Huntington likes to say,
where the rubber meets the road is, the key.
If you didn't know, Randy notably coached Su Bingtian to run the fastest ever 60-meter split of all time at 6.29, ahead of Usain Bolt's 6.31. When asked about what was one of the most important changes that helped Su make these improvements, Randy said, "Just kidding." No, what he actually said was that Su lacked any lower leg strength or power.
So he had no power. I took him over, guys at seated calf, and just tested him. His power output was about 735 watts, which was weaker than my weakest female triple jumper. So our first goal was to just get that soleus strength as high as we could get it. He's now in the 26 to 2700 watt range.
I have a lot more to say about this topic, which is why I plan on releasing a video that outlines an exact step-by-step approach to developing a well-conditioned and reactive lower leg. So please subscribe so that you don't miss that. I'm going to group the gastroc and the soleus together and put them in the B tier between the hip flexors and the quads. Next up we have the shoulders. Sprinters are well known for generally having well-developed shoulders, and that's no coincidence, since the shoulders are the main drivers of the arms, which are of course very active during a sprint. Because the shoulders and the arms are so closely linked in their role in sprinting, I'll discuss them together here. The main role of the arm drive during sprinting is to help counterbalance the rotational force, also known as torque, generated by your legs, which we referenced earlier. Here's how it works. When one leg swings forward during a sprint, it causes your body to rotate. swinging your opposite arm forward helps counterbalance this rotation. While the arm movement doesn't entirely cancel out the rotational force, it reduces it, and this is where the core muscles play a role, providing additional stabilization. This is why when you take your arms out of the equation by holding them up as you run, you'll feel your core is working a lot harder. I've also written a more detailed article about this, link in the description if you're interested. Overall, the shoulders are more critical in sprinting than the arms because they initiate the arm swing, whereas the arms act more like weights at the end of the lever system created by the shoulders. I want to put the shoulders in the C tier above the glute medius. Adding mass to your arms could potentially enhance your sprinting, but the effect would be quite small. I'm going to put the biceps and the triceps in the D tier. Next up we have the lats. I included the lats because the whole back in general doesn't get much attention in sprinting, and I also couldn't really find any research on the topic. This has always surprised me, as I'd imagine that the lats serve an important role in coordinating the upper body and contributing to an efficient arm drive. So it was really interesting to see this during Noah Lyle's training videos.
More activation, so coming out of the blocks we wanted to be really active through his lats and his glutes, the big prime movers. So we're just activating the lats. He just wasn't feeling the lat as well. That's something we've been working on.
I'm going to put the lats in the C tier at the bottom. Now we move on to the hamstrings. As many of you may be aware, the hamstrings play a critical role in sprinting and perhaps are even the most frequently analysed muscle in sprint-related research. They are most active during the late swing phase, just before your foot hits the ground, as well as the early stance phase, just after your foot hits the ground. And so it makes sense that the research has shown that the hamstrings are most susceptible to injury during these specific moments of the sprint cycle. There's so much to say about the role of the hamstrings during sprinting, and so I'll just cover the most important part here. During the late swing phase, the hamstring does two main things. One, they assist in hip extension. For the unfamiliar, you can think of hip extension as increasing the angle at the hip joint. Hip extension is extremely important as this is the movement that will generate most of the force needed to propel you forward. Two, they help prevent the lower leg from swinging forward. When your leg swings forward, your leg naturally wants to open up at the knee joint. However, this can cause us to land far out in front of the body, which can create unwanted braking forces. The hamstrings help by preventing the leg from swinging out and thus allow us to strike the ground in a more biomechanically favorable way. And I'm going to put the hamstrings in the S tier. Next up, we have the Sartorius and the TFL. I'm going to group these together. I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard of these muscles before, as they're kind of niche. I included these muscles because a now famous study that compared muscle sizes across non-sprinters, sub-elite sprinters, and elite sprinters found that the volume of the Sartorius and TFL correlated with how fast the person was. Now, this is a good time to talk about the idea that correlation does not equal causation. For example, we might find that shark attacks increase when ice cream sales go up. So does that mean that there is something in the ice cream that causes shark attacks? Well, no, it might just mean that summer has started. And so just because certain muscles tend to be bigger in elite sprinters, that doesn't mean that those muscles are important for sprinting faster. However, there are reasons to think that the Sartorius and TFL are causally related to running fast. Both the TFL and Sartorius are relatively smaller muscles that both serve multiple functions. Some of these being weak hip and knee flexion, which as we have seen earlier do play a role in sprinting. I'm honestly not too sure what to think of these muscles, since I'd imagine that the larger muscle groups would have a much higher overall impact. However, if we're talking about the relative importance of these muscles, or their bang for their buck, so to speak, then I think we should rank these high. I'm going to put the Sartorius and the TFL in the A tier below the core. But wait, we're out of muscles. What about the muscle that I said was going to be a game changer for sprinting? Well, I've been hiding it to build suspense, but now, after hours of research, after much consideration, I can now announce that the most important muscle for sprinting is the glute max. It's the glute max. The gluteus maximus is the largest and heaviest muscle in the body, and it really is like the engine for sprinting. That paper I mentioned earlier that compared the muscle sizes of elite and sub-elite sprinters found that the biggest difference across all muscles was with the glute max. Here's a diagram from that paper that shows their findings. And there are reasons to think that this is more than just mere correlation. and that the glute max actually plays a large role in sprint performance. You may remember how I talked about the importance of hip extension earlier. Well, the glute max is the primary muscle responsible for this movement. During a sprint, with each step you take, your glute max contracts, propelling you forward by generating significant power. But don't just expect to spam hip thrusts to get faster. I've mentioned before, sprinting is a specific multifaceted skill that cannot boil down to a single variable. That being said, I'm of course going to put the glute max and the S tier at the very top. To learn about building up the other S tier muscle for sprinting, the hamstrings, check out this video here.